first thank Cabot Oil and Gas and George Stark for organizing the webinar. Cabot has done so much great work in Pennsylvania's 12th Congressional District, even prior to what we've seen with COVID. You know, they've been good educational partners with family-sustaining jobs. And when you look at Susquehanna County, which is between Scranton and Binghamton, New York, the unemployment prior to COVID-19, they knew the people. It wasn't a percentage of it. They could count the people that were unemployed. And we're going to get back to that. But it's going to take some leadership, and it's going to take the partnership that Cabot has with our, and many of our energy companies have, with the communities where they're operating. The amazing partnership with Cabot in helping prior to the pandemic, but also during this, they've been stocking shelves at food banks, the small business funding program, and continuing to produce energy that's going to help get us through this pandemic and beyond.
Look, I was born and raised in the South Hills of Pittsburgh, and I've seen the transformation that the natural gas industry has had on this corner of Pennsylvania. That's why last summer I even brought up a few other members that are on the HEAT team to see the renaissance here. We did some tours. It was incredible. But we are now, as you guys know, we're America's second largest natural gas producing state. We're really a state among nations in terms of natural gas production, just like Texas is.
We also know that the natural gas here in Pennsylvania is not going anywhere. As long as we have these resources, when demand increases and the market manipulation ceases, our natural gas industry in northeastern and north central Pennsylvania will once again put us on track for another great American comeback.
Pennsylvania Oil and Gas really is the backbone of many rural communities throughout the Commonwealth, and it's the lifeblood of our economy.
So we got to remember that oil and gas production isn't just about affordable energy. I say it all the time. It's about the other jobs that come with it, because as we increase the amount of oil and gas and we reduce the cost of oil and gas, we of course reduce energy costs, which not only is beneficial to the average family that saves roughly $1,200 a year because of it. Just think about the manufacturers. We also have, so it's cheaper to manufacture here in Western Pennsylvania in the United States. This is going to be critical as we bring our supply chains back and start to manufacture more domestically. We also cannot forget that we have cheap and abundant petrochemicals. So instead of having to import those petrochemicals, it's right here. So we have cheap, abundant energy. We have cheap, abundant petrochemicals. So in terms of manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, we're really poised to just explode when we come out of this pandemic.
You know, the people that own Exxon and Cabot and all these places, or the school teacher, the retail clerk, the farmer, the auto worker, all the people in our community, our families, friends, and neighbors. And we have to make sure that that point is brought up every time when people talk about how bad, you know, and I hear that, you know, they say, well, these companies, well, who are these companies? These companies are the capitalistic society that built the greatest economy in the world. And they are because people own them, people in the communities, and the companies care. And I keep going back to this, but it's a perfect example of what Cabot has done, you know, prior to the investments that have been made in education, prior to the pandemic that are continuing, but then also how you're helping the neighbors right here with the food banks and so on.
Now, after securing a qualified and trained workforce, energy is the next critical consideration and cost for almost every business and industry. For American families, energy is a key part of the family budget, whether for the comfort of their homes or, quite frankly, to commute to work or into the community.
You know, supply chains, the work put in by domestic suppliers, you know, like our truckers, our farmers, our energy producing companies, and so many others have been nothing short of heroic, along with our first responders keeping us safe and taking care of us if we become sick. We're grateful for the work these individuals are doing on a daily basis to ensure Americans have the resources we need to get by. This pandemic has highlighted the need to bring our supply chain back to the United States and reduce our reliance on so many goods, food supplies, and pharmaceuticals coming from China and in that area. And our natural gas industry is going to help fuel that. I mean, we've done so much already. It's going to help us bring that manufacturing back to America.
But I do believe that as we recover from this pandemic, we've got to do something to make sure that we maintain our supply chain of energy. And of course, the more that we have it produced domestically, the better it's going to be for us.
We've heard a lot about the people who want to ban hydraulic fracturing, who want to ban fossil fuels. And to me, just as a real quick pushback, anyone who has looked at what the oil and natural gas industry in this country, in this Commonwealth, has done, one of the great examples of being able to produce the raw materials to make PPE. One of the great stories was that the individuals who had themselves locked in down at Braskem and Marcus Hook down in my old area to make the raw material to make PPE. A great story. We can't do that without a U.S. oil, natural gas industry. We cannot do it. You've talked a lot about what's been sent over to China. It's a great story, and it's only made possible because of having domestic energy.
Because I guarantee you, every one of those individuals that signed into that Green New Deal grabbed their smartphone and tweeted about it. How can you make a smartphone without petrochemicals? It's impossible. And I bet they go into their local REI shop or wherever, and they get a vegan bar that's wrapped in a petrochemical. It's absolute hypocrisy. So we've got to make sure that we tie petrochemicals to not only reduction in CO2 emission, national security, low cost for consumers, but also bring it full circle and talk about how much is manufactured from petrochemicals and how those petrochemicals improve our quality of life. We have to remind people that this community, and when I say this community, the Green New Deal folks, they're the ones that wanted to keep us in the Paris Climate Accord. We are the only nation that signed on to that agreement that has actually reduced our CO2 emissions. And we should remind individuals of that. As far as China goes in that agreement and some other nations, they don't even need to drop until they hit a 2030 level. So it's an absolute farce. It's a work of fiction that the United States is not doing more to reduce our CO2, but we're not reducing our CO2 emissions because we're chasing these fantasies that they have in the Green New Deal. We're doing it because we've unleashed natural gas in the fracking industry, and now natural gas, which I consider a clean energy source, is reducing our CO2 emission, and we continue to drop. So we need to continue to remind people of that.
On any given day, up to 10% of America's natural gas is produced out of PA12. And much of that in Bradford and Susquehanna counties. Cabot's been a leader in making sure that happens. And again, downstream jobs. And, we've talked about that. Additional infrastructure needs, we need to get that done. We need to make sure the policies allow our gas from Pennsylvania to get to New England, so we're not relying on foreign countries to ship gas into Massachusetts and other parts, and sending our wealth and transmitting our wealth to people who do not like us or do not share the values of America or our allies.
Here we are in Susquehanna County, and we know that the United States regulations, we know Pennsylvania regulations, and it's our natural gas underneath the farmers from Susquehanna County, Donna Williams, underneath her farm. That gas 33 days later will make itself from Cove Point through the Panama Canal and get to Japan. And again, the care that we take to ensure that we're producing that natural gas in the cleanest environment. And again, we know the United States regulations, we know Pennsylvania regulations, but again, to have that gas to be able to get to Japan that clearly, that quickly, just shows the energy security that we ought to have. And again, to think that somehow overland we can't get to Massachusetts in a straight pipeline, it's ridiculous to me to have folks in New England pay 4 times as much for their energy at a time when they're unemployed.
So that's why we've got to make sure that we're supporting this industry, that we're strengthening our supply chain, making sure we have domestic energy production, and that not only helps us militarily, it helps us exert influence abroad, and it gives us a lot of independence, again, on the foreign on the foreign stage and also at home as we bring back this manufacturing.
It's important that we have policies, not just in Washington, D.C., but here in Pennsylvania. House Bill 1100 by my former colleague, Aaron Coffer, to bring industry into Pennsylvania. We need to make sure that we're all working on this.
As far as our supply chain, bringing it back, of course, that's going to be incredibly important. but we should make businesses want to move back to the United States. We should have an environment that actually welcomes business, innovation, and expanding businesses right here. And again, you do that by reducing the corporate income tax, reducing taxes, and reducing regulation, and making this nation a really good place to manufacture and do other kinds of business.
Our Pennsylvania energy was a huge part of the Great American Comeback, and it will be a huge part of this second edition post-COVID-19 of the Great American Comeback.